I remember getting with maybe 1,000 prisoners, and they took all the overcoats, those long ones, that guys had on. I didn't have one on, but then they decided to give them all back, and two of my buddies grabbed the coats, and one of them had two D-bars in it. And
what's a D-bar?
A D-bar is a chocolate bar, it's pretty good size. And we hadn't eaten, see, this had to be the second or third day we'd been captured, and we hadn't eaten since Friday night. Well, we had a D-bar in the hole. They had, for some reason, they'd taken our sea rations away from us in our holes. Somebody shot a hole through the captain's tent, and somebody liberated some stuff in the kitchen truck coming up. So that's what I had against this captain. He did stuff that he really shouldn't have done, in my opinion. But we were hungry. And then we marched, I don't know, for a few days. I don't know if you ever read that book, Last Winter or Lost Winter, where the RNA platoon stopped. They got captured the first day, but they held up one of those German generals for all day almost. Anyway, we traveled. I was on that train, the same, I don't know if it's the same one, but just like it. I mean, it was the worst days I ever spent, as far as, it had to be they call them a 40 and 8 boxcar. And I don't know how many guys, you couldn't lay down, and part of you could sit down, and you sat with one in between your legs here, and they keep you on there, and if you had to go to the bathroom, there was a sliding door that was supposed to go over there. There was a little opening about that large with bars across it for air, and we were on there, I think, 3 days maybe. They would let they left us off everyone, not very often, once in a while, to go to the bathroom. And of course, it's snowing around, so you wanted to hunt something white, not yellow. I don't know how this guy had this wristwatch, but he had a wristwatch out, and he traded it for a half a loaf of bread through that opening. And I can only remember eating twice that they really fed us in almost 2 weeks. Now, we grabbed some sugar beets one time. They weren't sugar beets, but the roots of sugar beets where they'd harvested it. These were when we were marching, and that was along the road. But I went to first camp I came to, someone had bombed it or something, and didn't have room for us, so there was about 200 of us that went to Nuremberg, to this camp, and it was mainly Russian and Italian prisoners. And the Russians, when we got to talk to them, they'd been there 3 and 4 years. They started out 40,000, and there was only 10,000 left. For breakfast, you had a bowl of tea and a spoonful of jam. Then for lunch, you'd get like rutabaga soup. And in the evening, you get more rutabaga or some soup and a portion of bread, depending on how many uh, people, how many loaves they had, usually from 14 to 20 some slices of bread in a loaf. I'd get that at the evening. And once a week you'd get a little piece of sausage and a piece of cheese. And if you were, they separated officers. Officers went to a different camp. But the non-coms and I was a PFC. Privates and PFCs were to work. And believe it or not, that was better for you. It'd give you your mind something to do. Mm-hmm. Now we dug, in Nuremberg, we dug graves for a month, I guess, burying the civilian air raid people that got killed. And we dug, and we cleaned out, bombed out buildings, and we worked in the warehouse for a while. Then the Air Force, they keep them separate too. So I don't know why, but these Air Force, they moved some of them from, I think, in Poland into the camp we were in. So they didn't allow us to be with them. They had toothbrushes, and we didn't have a toothbrush or anything. But they decided to move us. So they moved us to Hammelburg, and that was the worst. That was worse yet. You could steal or liberate anything you wanted except from your own guys. That was the law, or in the prison camp. And if you got caught stealing from your own prisoner, they shaved your head and threw you into it was a latrine pit, maybe just a bit larger than this room. Had a rail around it. That was the toilet. And I don't know if you remember reading about Patton sending that raid 60 miles ahead of the lines to liberate his son-in-law. Well, we were there when that happened, and we thought the whole army was coming. We basically, the guards took off, and we killed every chicken in sight and what have you. And that night, those guys were all captured.
Which guys were captured?
The guys that Patton had sent in there, it was like maybe 100 guys. And they had tanks and half trucks, and it was all part of an armored unit. And they thought there were just officers there, but there was English, there was American, Belgian, and there was thousands. I mean, and the original plan was for them to get the officers on the tanks and half trucks and get back to the lines. Of course, once they come in, their camp was a little on a hill like, and the Germans come in behind them and knocked them out. And so that night, what was left were prisoners. And I can remember we didn't get fed that day, but that night, maybe late, it was dark, they fed us, and those guys were given the same portions that we had, but they wouldn't eat it because it wasn't very good. So we got double rations that day. Those guys would give us their share. Yeah, and gee whiz. So there was 4 of us, and we sort of were buddies, and one got sick, well, we'd sort of take care of each other. And it was so cold, we'd sleep 2 to a bunk, keep warm. Okay. they we decided we'd sign up for a work detail. They had, you could sign up and go to work. And we figured working would be better than in prison camp, so we signed up for this work detail. And for some reason, the one buddy got chopped off. So the three of us went with this detail to Bad Kissingen. And I think it was like a university there, and this German general was in charge of it. And 5 of us were his gardener. And boy, I'll tell you, we had, we didn't have an inside toilet, but it had a seat and a bucket underneath, and every morning you carried that out. But we were gardeners, and this guy would throw a party every night, and then they'd bring their bottles of booze, rack them between the trees outside in the garden. And they'd always have just a little bit in them. And when we'd go in there to work on his garden, we'd get all those garden bottles and pour them, and we'd each have a little taste. And that guy got me a pair of shoes. I got a pair of German shoes, and I got my first bath. This guard brought out a tub full of hot water and stuff, and for 3 of us. So we had to draw straws who was first. I only got number 2, but I was better than number 3. Then they started to hear artillery, and they moved us back to Hammelburg. And it wasn't long till we started hearing artillery again, and they going to move us. So one buddy was really sick, so the sick got to ride in the train. So we all 3 got sick, and they hadn't been giving out the Red Cross parcels like they should. So they said, whatever parcels you can carry. We went to a warehouse and picked them up. Of course, we could carry, a couple. I carried them back to the train, and we ate too much, got sick. Your stomach was so shrunk that you couldn't eat, a whole bunch at one time. And then the darn train got strafed, and the people said they're lucky it wasn't the French, it was Americans. They knocked the engine out, but the French strafed the train lengthwise. It was all POWs, and so we had to walk the rest of the way through, walked through Munich, and we went to Moosburg. That was the last camp I was in. And it was getting warm, and sanitation was terrible. And we slept on the ground on straw, and the body lice, you could get rid of them during the day, but at night, you got them back again. So the entertainment was sitting in the sun in the morning, who could find the largest lice on the body. But and they had some Gurkhas, that's it, from India. They're great big guys. And when they surrendered, they would not attempt to escape. So they didn't even fence them in. But they were outside our compound, and it was kind of interesting how guys would trade cigarettes, and they'd take a pack of cigarettes and take most of them out and then throw them in, and a couple would there, and then they'd show them over the fence, and we'd trade back and forth. But those Gurkhas would really get mad because these guys were throwing them empty packs of cigarettes. But my own outfit liberated us 29th of April. And the next day or so, the English and the Russians, they took off and they just ruined that town, the Mooseburg, the Russians. But we were to stay in camp, and they started to feed us light food and stuff to get us back in shape. And we, after roll call, we'd sneak through the fence and round the. In fact, I caught up with my company. I knew one guy. He was a private when I left. He was a tech sergeant then. So I'm not sure, I might have been lucky.
I guess the four amigos that you were a part of, how many of them made it through the prison time?
All four of us. Good shape. This one kid that didn't get to go with us, he was by himself, and they sent him to a German farmer, and he said that was great. He got to eat a lot, and we met when we got liberated. They sent us back to France, of course, the Havre, Camp Lucky Strike. We found him, and he gave us, how he got treated.
So the Russians and the American units kind of liberated at the same time, the same camp that you were at?
Well, the Americans liberated us, but there was a bunch of Russians in that prison camp, and a bunch of English. Yeah, gee, we sneaked through the fence. We stole or didn't steal it. We liberated our motorcycle one day, and we was having a big time.
What was it like when you first met Russian soldiers for the first time? What was that like?
Well, the trouble is you don't know the language. You couldn't. But I think the one kid, buddy of mine, was Polish. And he could get a drift to some of it. In fact, the two guards we had at Bad Kiskin were Polish. And of course he could speak it, so we got the guards, and that's where got along great. He got me these shoes, and that bath he got us.
Some of the English troops that were there, did you talk to them at all? How maybe they got it into that too? Or
What's that?
the English troops that were in there?
Oh.
How did you talk to them at all?
Oh yeah. Especially at Hammelburg. There was a bunch of the English soldier they weren't used to eating like Americans were, and like you got that slice of bread in the evening meal. The next morning that Englishman would have part of that bread, but you never saw an American have a piece of that left. And in the afternoon at there, 4 o'clock or whatever it was, you'd see them out there, or they'd make little blowers out of tin cans, and they'd brew tea, and I don't know how much tea was in it, but it was hot water anyway. And you had to admire them. They were used to not eating as much as we were, and we were just starving.
So when you first saw, I guess the kind of things unfolding that you guys are about to be liberated and get out, what was that feeling like?
Well, they had, we could hear the artillery, of course, and there was 2 Tiger tanks sitting right in front of our compound there, with their barrels facing in towards us, and the rumor was they were going to mow us down. And I can remember you could see fairly far. I remember seeing some tanks clear the hills, maybe 3 miles away or so, and those German tanks took off. And we thought, boy, we're okay. And of course, the Army, rumors were just everybody has a rumor, I guess. There was, you know what starvation is. You don't, when you get liberated, you're so happy that you're free, or what is it, that you don't care what goes on, you're just free. The Russians, they went into that little town and they were throwing stuff out the upstairs windows and just tearing it apart. There's a lot goes on that you really aren't too proud of.
In terms of that goes on inside of the prison camps? Or?
Well, the prison, it was afterwards. Like when they liberated us, and then they said, well, you guys are going to stay inside this and we'll feed you and get you back. Well, we wanted a little action, so we'd sneak through the fence after roll call. And we went out in the countryside and had a knife and a pistol. We didn't do anything real bad. We stole watches from, and we didn't rape any girls or stuff like that. But
seemed like more or less just getting some resources, a little bit of food, or just a few things to have.
Yeah,
So, was the war over when you were captured, or not captured, but when you were liberated?
Yeah, well, officially it was over May 6th, wasn't it, I think, or yeah, 5th or 6th. But they were making 40 miles a day. The line was when they went by us. And it was basically over. There was still, they hadn't picked up all the dead yet when we were out scrounging around.
Some of the Allied troops were still, or some of the German troops were still out there, you said?
The German troops, well, these were mostly German, and they hadn't picked them up yet. Yeah, you know, I was 4.5 months in there, I think, and your uniform was just greasy black, and I had a field jacket. Was instead of light, it was dark, and we went up in one of those railroad stations where all the levers are and stuff like that, and I found a German railroad pair of pants was bright blue. So I took those old D's off and put those pants on. I think the only thing I kept was my field jacket so they know I was American. I don't think I had a hat. And when we caught up with my company, that lieutenant just about had a hemorrhage. And he got us a uniform.
So when you get back with your guys, the 99th, and there was nobody else to kind of share other than one other guy you mentioned about to share your experience with. I mean, how did you catch up on everything, and kind of what were some of the events after you kind of got back to Le Havre, France, and how did things go from there?
Well, they flew us out of Germany into Le Havre, Reims, I think it was. And then we trucked to Camp Lucky Strike. And it was, of course, a big area. And it was really a holding station for the ship back to the States. And you went by who was ever there first or home. I was mostly by points, I think. You got so many points for being overseas and so much for combat and that kind of stuff. And you had a clean bed, there was tents, good food.
How much did you weigh at that point?
Well, I think I was probably maybe a 140, somewhere in there. It was never weighed or anything, but you were pretty skinny. And the German bread, I have a recipe sometime, but it was made out of sawdust. Well, stuff you wouldn't think of. Potatoes. I mean, if you dropped it on your toe without a shoe on it, it would smart. It was really heavy. And I should have. I have that recipe someplace, but I don't have it handy.
Oh, that's fine.
But it'd surprise you. And I don't know how they'd. I was trying to think why, like yeast, it didn't have yeast. So it was sour. But it was so heavy, you was used to eating that. When Americans come in and liberated you, you ate white bread. It was like eating air. You didn't feel like you were eating anything.
So
it was fast and furious. Like I was in, 2 years, well, but most, some of these guys were in 4 and 5 years. I think I'm pretty lucky.
to the States.
I think I was in Lucky Strike maybe like 2 weeks, and I got one of the big transports, a nice boat coming back, come into New York Harbor to Statue of Liberty, and then they sent us to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and from there they sent me home for 4 weeks, and that was great. And then they assigned me in Georgia. It was a camp, and you were discharged by the amount of points you had. So, of course, I hadn't been in that long, so a lot of guys had more points than I had. And I was a secretary to a first sergeant. He wanted me at Fort Oglethorpe, and he wanted me to stay in and give me a rank, but I was so ready to get out. I could have got a injury thing for eyesight and shoes, but I was so anxious to get out. They said you have to be here 2 more weeks. And I said goodbye, I'm leaving. And So I was in that camp until December of 45, and shipped me to Fort Knox for my discharge.
So you went from Georgia up to Fort Knox, then for your discharge,
Yeah.
and so you were discharged. Real quick, one thing I want to ask: when you seen the Statue of Liberty when you were coming back, did it? What emotions or what? How did you feel when you seen that?
I don't know. I think you felt, well, boy, I'm home.